Welcome everybody to this month's edition of the DeSimone Deals Exit Strategy Podcast. Easy for me to say, even though I do this every single month. As you will know, I bring on guests throughout the year to help us educate buyers who are potentially thinking about bringing their business to market, or businesses that are looking to transition from one generation to the next. All in all, we're just trying to make sure that businesses are prepared for the ultimate exit that they're going to take, and they take control of that exit. In order to help us do that this month, I've brought on one of my good friends and colleague from Focal Point Coaching. He's also a member of the Value and Transition Advisors Group, which we all focus on succession exit planning within Focal Point. So without further ado, I want to introduce Todd Eppert and let him explain who he is, and then we'll get right into the content.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me today. So as Greg said, I am a Focal Point business coach and part of the Value and Transition Advisors community at Focal Point. I do focus my coaching practice today on exit planning, but I've been doing this for 6.5 years. And, when you start a business, sometimes you allow the market to take you where you are. So I do have executive coaching clients, and I have clients that are working with me that don't really know that they're exiting, but we're planning for it just in case. But yeah, that's what I do with my clients today.
Now, how did you get into coaching? What was the impetus to get into coaching?
Yeah, so I grew up in the manufacturing world. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio, by the way. I probably should have said that.
We won't hold that against you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I went to engineering school, and I came out and worked in manufacturing for 25 years, and got to the level that I thought I was supposed to be, which was the chief operating officer at about $100 million company. And we were growing. We actually got to close to 200 while I was there. And during my time there, I did become the guy that was the closing of the plants and the termination guy. I felt like I was the hit man in the business. And I thought that's what all COOs did. So I said, you know what, I don't want to do this the rest of my life. So I left. And actually, technically, it was their choice, but in the end, it was very good for me as well. That was the end of 2017. And I said, man, what do I want to do now? I surely couldn't go back to being a COO. And business ownership made a lot of sense to me. And coaching really made a lot of sense to me because I've always been a developer of people. So I found Focal Point, and I joined in early 2018.
Excellent. And as we talked earlier, this podcast is about exit strategies for your business. I know one of the focuses and one of the niches within your practice is exit succession. How did that become one of your niches, and why is it important to you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when I grew up in an hourly household, my dad was a tool and die maker. So I give you this history because it matters. I remember having dinner conversations several times when my dad would come home and say, I got a pink slip today. And that changed a lot of things. It meant that we probably ate a lot more meals in-house, and we probably went camping down the street instead of to Tennessee or Indiana or someplace out of state, right? So we cut costs. So I became a COO, and as we were acquiring businesses, part of the integration process was determined, was the plant a viable business or not? And we bought a lot of small businesses, and a lot of those businesses did not survive. And that's what I was doing to people. So that's one of the reasons why I didn't like being a COO. I felt like I was ruining families, for lack of a better word, and it just brought back a lot of childhood pain and what my families had to deal with. And so when I started coaching, I said, you know what, I want to change that narrative. It's not bad for companies to sell. Family businesses can sell and do it really well, but how do you prepare them to do it well so that the transition happens in a good way is really why I do it. That's my why behind it.
Excellent. So I'm gonna probably loop back into that PE question, but I want to get some foundational information on how you work with your clients and stuff that we want to convey to the business owners who may be thinking, well, they are going to go through this process, but we want them to be more proactive about it. So as you're dealing with clients, what are some of the common issues that a client would come to you for, to say, hey, I'm thinking about, or what? Actually, why don't we start? What do they call you for when when it relates to exit strategy? What do they call you for, and what's it sound like? How are they thinking about it?
It's a good question. Sometimes clients do know that they need a transition of some kind, but a lot of clients just call me because they need help, right? They don't know how to build an agency, or they don't know how to build a team, or they don't know how to grow their business. And so that's sometimes where the conversation starts. In the exit world, You mentioned family transitions at the beginning of your intro. I do a lot of family transition work as well. And so sometimes people approach me and say, hey, my son or daughter or family member is involved in the business, and I'm thinking about a transition someday. Could you help me do that? And so that's often what I get approached for.
How often, the mix for like, I want to get ready to sell versus I want to do a family transition. Generally, what are you seeing in the marketplace or people coming to you? What's the division there?
So it's interesting that you would ask that. So I volunteer in the Cincinnati area at a group called the Next Generation Institute through the University of Cincinnati. And that's all family businesses looking to transition. But we asked the question early in that process, if your name wasn't on the wall to the next generation, would you want to work here? Would you want to own this business? And then we asked the current owners often the question of, so if this wasn't your son, daughter, relative, would you hire them to be the CEO of the company? Right. And so I think that's a big part of why people ask that question. They want to know, can my next generation do it? But the split for me is probably about 50-50, Greg,
Mhm.
coming in the door. But then over time, that does shift. Right. So some businesses that say, I want to transition, well, maybe the kids don't want it. And that turns into a potential transition and sale. Other times we work on the business, and the work that I do with businesses is I'm really building value in the business. I'm making the business better. I'm de-risking the business while I'm working with my client. And then the business becomes more attractive, and suddenly the family member wants to stay in the business rather than leave the business. So sometimes it goes both ways.
So I love the question. I've talked to you about this in the past, and I love the question you ask. Would you, relative, would you want to buy this if your name was on the wall, or would you pay this person to do this job if they weren't related to you? What are the answers that you sometimes get? And they surprising when you actually ask those questions?
Yes. So sometimes parents are like, I'm not sure my kid's got what it takes, right? And that's a really common problem in family business. The parent will always see the child as a child, right? It takes some real effort and some real communication and some real work to see the child as a professional person that could do this job. And so that when I ask that question, oftentimes they're like, wow, now that you ask it, I'm not real sure if this is a good idea, right? Uh, and actually, the kids, sometimes for the kids, it's a freeing moment, right? They're like, you know what? All I ever thought I was going to do was take over my dad or mom's business, and I wasn't sure I wanted to do that. So thank you for asking that question. I'm not sure I want to do that, but I also don't want to insult my mom or dad or my family member, right? And so I think it's sometimes a freeing and an eye-opening question for them to really think about.
I love that question because I do think it is freeing, and I think it sets up for then more open dialogue on, okay, here's all the ways we can transition from one
Right.
division or transition the business to, for me, in it to out of it. Kids are one,
Yep.
management's and this another, third parties another, and there's other variations.
Yeah.
And I know you're a certified exit planning advisor, a SEPA, so you go through all these different issues with your clients. But I'm going to kind of focus on those main three that we kind of deal with. Um,
Yeah. Hey, Greg, can I tell a quick story in those avenues, by the way, really quick?
absolutely.
Yeah, so I just heard this morning, so I think this is really relevant to talk about it. So I was at a networking event, and one of the people at the networking event was talking about the fact that they knew this really young, talented person that needed a job, and here's what he's done. And then they said, and he worked for his family business for a number of years, and the parents sold it. Now he doesn't have a job, right? And so the first thing that I think people need to understand is if you're the owner of the business, it's your right to decide what you do with your business. You should not feel compelled to sell it to your children or to give it to your children or to give it to you. If you own it, it's your decision to make. And candidly, when you make that decision, it can also free up your family to do what they're really passionate about. And instead of getting a business, they get a check probably when you pass away, right? So it's not always a bad thing. But anyways, I heard that story this morning, and I thought when you're talking about the different ways things happen, it's important for people to understand that it's their decision. It does need to be talked about and discussed, but in the
Mhm.
end of the day, it's okay to sell your business if that's what you want to do.
I agree. I think putting them all on the table and weighing the risks of each and the benefits of each and what the potential financial outcomes of each are based on all the resources available to. I think that's a very smart way to start every conversation when you get into this kind of a process. And
Yeah.
be open-minded and say, okay, we want this, so we're going to do it. Like, be open-minded and really evaluate it. Like, how often do you come across where your clients are actually open-minded about it, or are they coming with preconceived notions of what they want to do, and then you have to kind of reverse track as they start to dig into it, realizing, okay,
That's right.
what I thought was going to work is really not going to work. How often does
Oh,
that happen?
you know, that's a great question, Greg. I would say it happens almost every time, because what you start with, that change courses, right? And so things happen. Like I said, maybe the business becomes more attractive because instead of being a burden, it becomes a blessing. And then they're like, "Well, I don't want to sell the business. I want to stay, and maybe my kids want to take it." I actually have a client that I've worked with for a number of years that did go through a sale recently, that we meandered through a host of different ways that she was going to go through her business transition exit. It started with she was going to build a practice to sell. Then she was going to build a practice and eventually bring her daughter in, that she was going to be able to take it over. Then she investigated a partnership. And in the end, what she ended up doing was selling her business. And it took a little while to get there. It took a number of years and a number of questions and a number of plans and actions. And she's very happy today.
I think I know the answer to this, but I'm interested to hear your take on it. How different is the work preparing your business if you were going to prepare it from a generational transfer to a third party sale? How different is the work or the planning to prepare that business for that?
Yeah, so for the person that's the owner, I really don't think that the work is any different at all. They have to build processes, they have to hire good people, they have to learn to let go. And whether they're going to sell it to somebody else or give it to their kids, when they leave, the business will have the greatest opportunity to move forward is that if the business is divorced of them, for lack of a better word. The business can operate without that person. That's when you know you've done your job well. Now, if it's a transition to the children, there might be some follow-up coaching and some development of those kids. There could be other things like that. But for the owner, for the selling person, I think it's really the same work.
That's the answer I was expecting you to say, is like, and it's interesting. I don't know if you've come across this when I've worked with clients preparing them from a generational transfer or for a sale. When we start putting those things in place, building the next layer of management, putting in the process, procedures and policies in place so that next person can step up and fill in if someone leaves, putting in the mechanisms so that you can manage growth and profitability. A lot of times people say, well, I don't know if I want to sell anymore. This business
Right.
is a lot easier to run. Like, I thought I was just tired. I'm not. I just didn't have a business that was efficient and well run. How does that come? How does that play out with you and your clients?
Oh yeah, I see the same thing. And I think what we're both talking about is kind of the word I use is called owner dependency, right?
Hmm.
And so when the business is too dependent on the owner, it's not going to have a successful transaction, right? They either know all the customers or the employees all love them or they're doing all the work. And so if you try to transition that business, it's not going to be successful. So when we say we're building value or de-risking the business, that's what we're doing. We're removing that owner dependency in many ways. And to your point, oftentimes if the person was coming into it thinking, I'm exhausted, I just need to get out of this business, they have energy now because they've got a team that's operating and the business is operating at a higher level than they ever thought it was possible. It's worth way more than they thought it was ever going to be worth. And now it's actually fun. So I think at that point, it becomes a choice and the owner can just make a decision. Do I want to stay or do I want to go?
So you're kind of leading into my next couple of questions. One is like, was going to be common issues, clients coming for you for help. Owner dependency, I think, probably is a big one, but I would bet they don't come in thinking not all of them come in thinking that problem is that's too dependent on them. But let's talk about how owner dependency as an issue arises, and let's talk about different ways you can address it with your clients and how to evolve them out of the owner dependency role into actually like a true strategic CEO of a business.
Yeah, perfect. Let me give you a good example of that owner dependency model. So years ago, I had a good friend who came to me who owned a business, and was sharing the bad news that he had to go through a divorce. And he was asking me, he said, "Hey, I know you value businesses, or you can give an estimate of value. This isn't going to be a contentious divorce. We're going to use a mediator, but we just need to know a kind of a rough number." And I said, "Yeah, sure, but let's talk about your business." And he said, "Well, I write books and then I speak about them and I produce the content that we use, and all the content on the website is my stuff that I've developed. But most of the work, most of the revenue is driven by my speaking engagements in the books." And I said, "I don't think your business is worth anything." And he goes, "What?" And I said, "Well, what happens if you die tomorrow?" And he goes, I said, it's not going to operate, is it? And he goes, probably not. And I said, well, then it's not worth anything to anybody else. Now, there is some value to your business, but nobody's going to buy your business. It's so therefore, when you're looking at divorcing, you're looking at what the market could sell the business for, just like if you're splitting a house. And he was like, oh, I never thought about it like that. And I said, so I think in the mediation, we can certainly run a number for you and we can give you, it won't be zero, but it won't be what you think it's worth either. And it
Or
could
what
be a
she thinks
starting
it's
point,
worth.
or what she thinks it's worth, right? So yeah, so I told that story from the owner dependency side to help people understand what that really means. But a lot of times, I think business owners think that they have to do everything because that's what makes them important, right? And actually, what they're doing is they're actually hurting their business long term. It's a great, you can turn your business into a great business, but if you ever want it to transition well, you have to remove yourself from the business. You have to be willing to hire people, build processes, and let go. And you know that too, Greg.
I do. It's nice to hear other people with the same mindset. So, in that story talk, you mentioned the value of the business, and that comes up a lot with me. A lot of times, business owners have an asset, lots of assets. They have a house, they have their investments, and they have this illiquid asset, the business. How often do you deal with a client that actually knows what their business is worth, or how often do you deal with a client that knows what the business is worth and they're making decisions based on the value of the business?
Yeah, so the only time I've ever had a client that had a realistic idea of what the value of their business was when they've done a valuation with someone in the past couple of years. At least they have a real number from a CPA or professional valuation program. And they've done that for various reasons. Their operating agreement might require it. They might have had some situation in the business where they had to value the business to get a loan or to do other things. And so they've gotten that value and then they kind of have an understanding. But if they've never done that, they get it from a golf course, or they get it from a card table, or they get it from somewhere that's not realistic. And they have this huge number. And unfortunately, sometimes I have to tell them that their baby's ugly or that their business isn't really as good as they think it is, like I had to tell that gentleman on the phone. So unfortunately, and I'm sure you have to do that too, Greg, but yeah, I think most of the time, business owners have an unrealistic value of their business in their head.
How important is it for you in your process to actually get them grounded on what the real value is?
So for me, in my practice, I play the value accelerator role. So call it the de-risking role, the coaching role that happens from point of I think I'm going to sell in 3 to 5 years, maybe 7 to 10. And then when that actually happens, that's the work in between. And so they always start with a value. And my valuation tool that I use simply shows them the opportunities in the business, the value drivers and the value detractors. And then we focus our efforts on those things. And generally, the things I see with my clients are owner dependency, or maybe too much dependency on a key employee or a key customer, or something like that.
So you use the term the golf course, or I call it the country club valuation. Kind of elaborate on how that happens and how it's a little bit misleading to the clients you deal with.
Yeah, so oftentimes business owners make friends with business owners because they network together and they end up doing things together. The golf course is a joke, but oftentimes at the country club, the business owners get together and they're playing golf. And one day, Greg, my partner, shows up and goes, "Oh, guess what, guys? I sold my business last week." And they're like, "Really?" And he goes, "Yeah, I got 10 times the EBITDA in my business. I got $40 million for my business. It was amazing." So now everybody in that foursome that's an owner thinks that their business is going to sell for 10 times whatever they think their EBITDA is, if they even know what their EBITDA is, right? And so I think that's where the false valuation comes from, obviously. And as we know in the industry, different industries trade at different ranges, as well as inside the industry, you trade at different ranges because of the success of your business, size of the business, and all those things. And when they come to me with that, my business is worth 10 times, and they see that it's more worth 2 times, my tool actually shows them how we can make it worth 6 to 8, which is a more realistic number, if that makes sense.
And how does it come to that someone will say it's worth 10x and the business really isn't worth 10x? How does that come to where are they getting besides the person saying it? How do they get misguided? I have some thoughts, but I want to hear your thoughts.
Oh, yeah. So first of all, their friend said it, and so it kind of sticks in their brain, and they're like, "Oh, I think every business must be worth 10x, right?"
Mhm.
Or they actually, it could be coming out of pride. They're like, "Well, man, my business is way better than Greg's.
Mhm.
He's an insurance guy, and I'm an IT guy, and IT's so much more sexy than real." So they make these things up about their own business, right? But I think it's a lot of in their head. Of course, they have spent blood, sweat, and tears to build that business. It is like a child, and so nobody wants to see their baby as something that's not attractive to somebody else, and so they build unrealistic expectations. I think is really what it comes from.
I'll tell you what I've seen, and tell me if you see this similar.
Yeah.
Where someone says it's a 10, and I've actually had a client come in where I actually had a very good offer for them. It was at 7.5 times their earnings, was in the roofing space. And they came back and said, I think we're undervalued. We should be at 12. I heard at a conference it was 12. So this
Mm,
isn't the country club valuation. This is someone at a conference at the trade show. Um, and I said, well, was their number normalized or was it as reported? And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, your number is 7.5 times normalized, which means we added back all your personal expenses. We added
yep.
back all your excess compensation. Like you pay yourself $1 million a year. A normal GM gets paid 300,000. You have family members being paid who aren't really doing work. So when we normalize your actual, what the business would be if it wasn't family run, what your earnings were, you're getting 7.5 times, which is at the high end of the industry range. I said, by the way, if we just did as reported, you're getting way more than 12. You're getting
Mm,
2 times. I said, so I think that's where a lot of people get misunderstood is that they don't understand what the starting point, they don't understand EBITDA and what goes into the actual calculation.
yep.
And they just take that number at face value. The other thing I've actually seen is people will say I got 10x, but the real estate was included in the deal. And the
Yeah.
real
Right.
estate was worth a ton of money. And when you add the real estate and the business together, yeah, maybe it's 10x, but if you actually separate what the business is worth and real estate worth, the business might have been a 5 and the
Yep.
real estate was
Market.
chopped. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so
So
those are some of the things I see. How do you see that play out similarly?
Yeah, so when I said 10 times EBITDA, if they know what their EBITDA is, that's
Yeah.
exactly what I was talking to. So when I go through that assessment and talk to my clients, if they say I made $500,000 last year, that's where I start. And then there's add backs and there might be some drawdowns if they're not paying themselves market rate, for instance. We may take that number down because if you got to replace yourself, you're going to have to pay more, and that's going to reduce your profits, not add to your profits. But generally, there's more add backs in small businesses than there are takeaways, right?
Yeah, so I actually do agree. There's a lot of family businesses, or closely held business. There's some benefits of being that
Yeah.
closely
How many,
held.
how many cars do you run through your business? How many
Yes.
vacations do you take?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
those
So
things.
like it's not, you're not supposed to do that, but we see it all the time. And a lot of the buyers expect to see it and they make adjustments for it. But you
Right.
talked about the drawdowns are reductions. Talk about that this discussion of how you go in the reverse direction, like, okay, you're making X, but your market is here, or you're paying your kids a certain amount of money, but if you actually paid them their market rate, they'd be making something. Talk about how you deal with that situation, because I think that happens just as much as the personal expenses running through the business as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think again, going back to the kids example, they just think it's their responsibility to run mom or dad's company, and they mom or dad brings them on and says, "Hey, when I was your age, I made this much, and so that's what I'm going to pay you because you need to learn and you need to start from the ropes." And they might be half of what the market would say. And so when I have those conversations, first of all, we do it on paper, but oftentimes as well, in order to build that business for longer term success, we will make a progress or we'll make a schedule to get those people up to a market rate so that when we get to the sale table, the EBIT is actually a real number. There's not as many add backs or takeaways for that matter. Over the years I work with folks. Is that what you're asking, Greg?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. So when I start with a client and we run those numbers, we'll often start to reduce the things that we would add back as well as increase the things that we would take away if we see those things.
So we're talking about common issues that you deal with. We've talked about owner dependency, and I think that's massive. Whether they realize it or not, I think that's probably the first thing that needs to be addressed. You mentioned another one. So someone actually has delegated some work down, but it's concentrated on one key employee or two key employees. How do you handle that risk to make sure that the business still is transferable even though it's relying on maybe one or two key employees.
Yeah, so that again, so one key customer or couple key customers, anybody that makes up more than 20% of your revenue, in my
Mhm.
opinion, as a customer is a deep risk because oftentimes the owner knows the relationship. And again, that employee that's been with you for 20 years that really loves working for dad or mom may not want to work for the child, right? And that can be a real problem. So you may have to do some creative things with their compensation to get them to stay, like a stay bonus, that they could, if they stay 3 years after the transition, then they get a bonus. And maybe you pay that annually and it gets bigger as it goes. You can also give them some phantom stock options. So don't give them ownership rights from the voting interest, but you can give them some skin in the game, right? Hey, you stay and you work with my son to help grow it. The growth, we're gonna pay you on that growth, right? You're gonna be part of that solution in the future. So there's a lot of different ways that you can tie people. You can put key man life insurance on them. You can do all kinds of things to help reduce the risk of losing that person.
Mhm.
Those are the things that I've investigated.
So you talked about some of the strategies to mitigate that risk with the key employees. All of them seem like they involve having to communicate with a key employee that you may not be the owner sometime in the future. How do you help them navigate that conversation? Because sometimes that can be a shock, 'cause they know the person's not going to own it forever, but when it gets thrown on the table, it can be a shock to the system. How do you navigate that situation?
Yeah, so I actually just had a conversation with a client this week about they're thinking about offering ownership to an employee to get him to stay as they transition because he's such a key person. So sometimes that can happen as well. And I said, well, I think you need to have an open conversation with them. So communication, in my opinion, is often the number one thing that we need to encourage is just communicate. Now, timing, what, when, and how we say it is very, very important in that communication. You should not just come off the golf course with a 10x in your mind and go back to your business and say, I'm selling my business, because it's gonna create a lot of fear and it's gonna like worry, and it could cause a mass exodus. It could cause you to lose more of your business than you're trying to keep. So the way you communicate it and when you communicate is very, very important. That's the first thing. The second thing is, so go back to my example. I think you need to ask the person, do you want to be an owner? If it was offered to you, would you be interested in being an owner in the business? Kind of going back to that parent-child conversation. Maybe the employee just wants security in the future. Okay, well, we're going to give you a long-term agreement, or we're going to give you a whatever it looks like. You can do other things. Then you kind of know the boundaries that you're playing in. So you shouldn't assume that they're going to want to be the owner. They might just want security. And that's, I think, the main thing you're trying to do is secure them so that you can secure the business, de-risk.
How do you see the employees reacting, key employees reacting? Because a lot of times owners are afraid to talk about these issues because they're afraid of spooking everybody. But what have you seen is when these conversations have taken place? What do you see as the aftermath? Is it a positive or negative effect?
So oftentimes there's an initial shock, but again, depending on the owner of the business, if the owner is, reaching quote unquote retirement age, or maybe they've had a health scare or something like that, I don't think it's as big of an impact on the employees. Again, if you can show them a path forward, which is why the communication of what you communicate is very important. So here is what we're planning to do. Here's what it looks like for your future in the business. That's what they want to hear, I think, employees. So as long as you're able to have that nice, clear conversation, and of course, it may not be exactly what you plan from the very beginning, but if you're communicating to your employees what you're planning to do and what their future looks like, because they want to know what's in it for them, right?
Mhm.
I think that takes a lot of the fear out of it. And then if you can, depending on the people, if you do plan to allow them to have a small bite of the apple or a stay bonus of some kind, that can actually bring energy into the process. Hey, here's what we need to accomplish. We need your help to do it. And by helping us do it, we're going to give something back to you. I think that's another thing that owners need to remember is they need to think about the people that got them there, right? Especially as they go through that process. And the better they do that, the more successful their transition is going to be.
How hard is it to get that perspective through a business owner? Because I've had conversations with business owners saying, "Well, I pay them and I've given them a job for 20 years. They should be grateful and they should be happy that I'm going to be able to cash out." How do you change that? They're not that blatant, but in the back of the head, they do somewhat think like that. How do you transition where they, like you said, look at it, what's in it for the employees, what's in it for the other parties that are going to be important to this transition. How important is that to them to get their arms around it and really buy into that?
I think it's important because I think if you go towards that process without thinking those things through, you're keeping a big risk point. Because if an owner says to me back to me what you just said around, well, I've paid them for 20 years, they should be grateful. My simple question back is, great. What if they leave today? Oh my gosh, I would fall apart. Okay, well, if you tell them you're selling your business and don't tell them what's in it for them, they could leave today. So, so it's like buying an insurance policy. Why do you buy life insurance? Well, because if something happens to me, I want to make sure my family's taken care of. Well, if you're choosing to leave your business, you need to make sure the people that are left behind feel like they're taken care of, right? That's the whole point. So generally, if I ask enough questions around the catastrophic situations, it does start to open the business owner's eyes a little bit.
I think that perspective of what's in it for me just across the board, like whether you're trying to grow your business, like what's in it for my customers, like why should they buy from
Right.
me? Or what's in it for my suppliers? Why should they be giving me a deal? Why should they work with me? So I think just having that perspective actually just opens up a lot of doors instead of kind of being myopic and selfish. And it's easy to be selfish because it's your business, but
Right.
I love that concept of using that what's in it for me perspective when you're talking to the other parties, even when you go into the sale process. Um, why does the buyer want to buy this from you? Like they're not
Yeah.
buying your history, they're buying the future. So what's in it for them and how do you position it? So like how do you get them, the business owners, when they start to prepare for sale, looking at like, well, hey, I know what I see the business this way because I built it. How do you change the perspective saying, hey, what does this business look like to an outsider? How do you get them to what's in it for me for the third party that may be buying this? How do you work on that visual?
Yeah, good question. So I try to ask them to think about it like a customer. Like, if why do people work for you, with you? Because that's what we're doing. We're marketing your business to a buyer. You're not, this, so that's no different. When you're marketing to a customer, what are you trying to tell your customer of why they should work with you? It's the same reason why should somebody buy from you. So it's pretty easy. Not easy, shouldn't say it that way. Um, Nothing is easy. Sometimes it's simple, but it's never easy. But just asking questions around, well, why does your customer want to buy from you? Okay, well, why would this person want to buy the business from you? And oftentimes, starting that conversation can be difficult because it's hard for them to think about that. So oftentimes, what I will do is I'll have the buyer make, or the seller, the business owner, make what I would call like a short list. Who's the logical buyer in your space? Who would buy your business? Because oftentimes a business will transact to someone that's in their business space already. That's a fairly common process, right? As we know. And so, okay, let's say you're an HVAC company. Who's a likely HVAC company in your industry, in your area, that would buy your business? Okay, well, there's 5 of them. Okay, well, then tell me, why would that guy want to buy your business? Oh my gosh, we have these, we do 80% commercial and 20% residential, and he's 20% commercial and 80% residential. We'd balance his book. Okay, great. So we need to put that out front that we're a commercial-based HVAC business when we're selling our business, right?
Mhm.
And then they're like, "Oh, I get it." So,
So I've been throwing out some common issues that I've seen and trying to get your perspective. Are there any other and you've identified a couple, are there any other common issues or issues that you deal with regularly that you have to address with your clients as they prepare to transition from one generation to the next or to prepare for a sale?
yeah, so I think especially in like multi-partners situations, there can be dynamics in that multi-partnership situation where when they come to you, sometimes they're in an impasse. So there's already a conflict over something, like maybe someone's uh, listening more to a friend or a spouse than they are to their business partner, and so they're bringing that baggage in or whatever. And so I think there's some conflict management skills that have to go into it a little bit. And what I have found to be a really good tool in my box is I ask them to go back, to the beginning of their business. Why did they start it, and how did they have fun? And we create a theme often around that fun. We like to play putt-putt golf because we couldn't afford to be country club members. So when the conflict comes back, I'll just simply say putt-putt, and they'll look at me and I'll go, "We need to play some putt-putt." And they'll go, "Oh," right? Snap them back into why they did this in the first place. So it's simple conflict management tools, I think, are important in this process as well.
Mhm.
I hate to say it, but if you're working with families or partnerships, anytime there's multiple people involved, there's some psychology involved. I am not a psychologist. I don't pretend to be one,
Yeah.
but just listening skills can be good skills that you have to teach your people in the room. Like you're not listening to each other. I had a situation a couple of years ago where it was a 3-person brother team, and they came in, and one of the brothers was just hot after another one of the brothers, and he got really upset. And I finally, he said he just won't do his job, and I said, well, can I give you an outsider's perspective? And he said, sure. And I said, when did you stop trusting your brother? And the brother that was getting pounded on, I mean, tears running down his face. And the other brother just looked at him and he was like, oh my gosh. I said, what I hear is a lack of trust in your brothers. So what happened? And at the end of the meeting, they ended up hugging, and they're in a much better place now. The business is rolling well. I actually don't have them as a client, but
They did too good.
yeah, it's whatever. But sometimes we have to. It's a problem they have. That's a conflict in the business, right? It's not even something that we can easily coach them out of or work them through processes or people or owner dependency. It's conflict in themselves. I think that's a big one as well.
So you brought the multi-partner, and you brought up a couple issues there, and I like your analogy, or not your analogy, just story in the perspective of bringing them back to why you got together. But there are times where people's goals are different. When you're 30 and you set up a company, and now you're 55, there may be one that has like 4 kids going through college, one that never had kids, and they're in a different mindset and they have a different attitude of what they want to go. How do you reevaluate and align the goals of the company and the goals of the owner when they may be now going off in different directions because they're different people 20 years after they started the company? How do you address that as part of this process?
That's a great question. So I think you need to do it independently first, and then bring them together and share them. I think that's the way. So I use a construct from the SEPA language called a personal, financial, and business planning. And it's like 3 legs of a stool. And those 3 things, they have to be equal, or your stool obviously teeters and totters. It's not going to be very stable, but they also interact with each other as well. So the first thing I think you need to do is work with each partner to know what their personal plan is. The personal plan includes, people think it's all about the financial side. It's what are you going to do in retirement? Is there anybody that you like? Is there a legacy you want to leave behind? What is your personal stamp, right? Then the financial side, that's when you might need to look at your retirement planning and what does the business need to do and those kinds of things. And is there gaps? Like, do we need to is the business only worth 5 and it needs to be worth 10 so we can retire successfully? And then the business side more is the continuity. How's it going to move forward, right? What's the succession plan and all those kinds of things. So when I do that with partners individually, and then I bring them together, it's a great communication tool to open the doors of, hey, we do have different goals in life. I've got 4 kids in college. You don't have kids, to use your example. So my goal is different than yours. But I also don't want to be here forever. So sometimes that turns into a staggered exit, is what I would call it. I'm sure you've seen this as well, where one partner sells to the other, and then the final partner will then sell the whole business or transition the business in a different way. Or as they work together, which I've seen through clients as well, is they started as a staggered role and they end up leaving together because neither wants to work without the other, right? And so in the end, they come to an alignment around what's best for them individually as well as what's best for the business, which is cool.
It is cool. And tell me if I'm on target with whether it's owner dependency, communicate. Actually, forget it. Tell me if this is a common theme with a lot of the different issues. Communication, making sure that if there's an issue, you put it on the table so that the parties that have a ability to impact the issue are talking about it and coming together and getting in the same mindset of how to solve the problem.
Yeah, so communication, in my opinion, and when I was a COO, this was the same case. Communication is the number 1 problem in business. It's the number 1 problem. When you're in an exit process, a failure to communicate is like throwing gas on the fire, right? It's way worse. And what's happening, by the way, is people start to notice that maybe the business owner is doing things outside of the business, and they start to notice, like, where's Todd been? Like, he's usually here like 60 hours a week, and suddenly he's gone half a day on Fridays. What's going on with Todd? Well, they start making stuff up. And whatever they make up is way worse than what's really going on, right? They make up, he's got a medical issue, he's dying of cancer, whatever, you name what it is, right?
Yeah.
It's way worse. And so communication, and again, go back to what I started, it's the what are you going to communicate, when you're going to communicate is really, really important, in my opinion.
Right. I want to bring it, you mentioned your COO role, and I want to kind of bring it back to your past experience and how you leverage those experiences in your current role as we wrap up to the end of the hour. Um, so how is your experience as a COO in PE, working in PE firms and manufacturing? How have you taken those experiences and applied them to your current role as a SEPA and exit planning coach with your clients?
Yeah, so what's really interesting is I mentioned that I became the hitman after we couldn't assimilate certain plants into the process. Something happened with them, and I had to close a plant or terminate some people or whatever. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was learning what happens when a poorly prepared business to transition sells. Right, they sold to private equity. The owner got a check, which probably wasn't as much as he would have gotten. The infamous tactic in private equity is to give the owner a bite of the apple and do what's called an earnout. Right, they get a 2 or 3 year earnout that often isn't made because the owner doesn't have the energy. Right, and they don't want to work for anybody else. So it's not the PE's fault. It's not necessarily the owner's fault, but they did the wrong things, for lack of a better word. The best opportunity would be if you sell your business is to get your check and walk away. That's the best opportunity. You may have like a 6 month transition period, but be a consultant, get paid to do that. don't make it part of your sailing composition, right? So I think I learned that a lot during that PE phase where we were buying businesses, and then I was the guy that had to come in after the owner was probably gone most of the time, meaning once the owner sold, they weren't in the business the 40, 50 hours a week anymore, right? Maybe they were out selling, or they were meeting with corporate to do some things to transition. And I would find things like, wow, this is all owner dependent. All the head knowledge is in the owner's head. Or one situation I had was the entire business was tribal knowledge on the shop floor. There were no processes. I mean, so it was really, really rough. And we had some other things going on financially. So I learned a lot about what an acquisition of a business that's poorly ready to transition can turn into. And so that helps me a lot when I'm talking to clients. And I'll often share stories from my past with my clients or my prospects and explain that, hey, the reason I do this is I don't want to see what happened. I don't want to see your business turn into what I had to used to do to clients or to businesses. I think it did a good job of educating me on what the small business world needs to look like when it's ready to transition.
I have one follow-up here. Because as you know, I do what you do, but I also do a lot of transactional work.
Yeah.
And I agree with you 100%. The absolute best possible situation is to get all cash at close. But there are some times where the only way to close a gap between valuation, what you think your business is worth, and with the other side, whether it's private equity or strategic, but private equities, typically you'll see this earnout as a way to bridge that gap. Like, yeah,
Yep.
we'll give it to you, but you got to show me it's going to keep doing what you said, or it's going to grow like you said it's going to grow. No, being from the other side, being the buy side, what are some of the things that a person selling their business should consider if they have to? The only way to bridge that gap is an earnout. What are some of the things that they should consider to make sure are in place before they accept that earnout, knowing that and let's assume that we've already written off the fact we can't get all cash to get the value out. We're going to have to do 10% in an earnout, 15% in an earnout. What are some of the things that they should be aware of to help protect their interests going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so before I even go into this, let me be really, really clear. Selling your business to private equity is not a bad idea. It's a great way to transition your business, or to a strategic partner, which is someone that is going to do the same work, right? It's someone that does the work that you do, that's just going to add you on and be able to just reap the synergies, for lack of a better word. So I want to be really clear with the listeners. There is nothing wrong with the private equity exit or a strategic exit. I don't want to make that sound terrible. It's just when it's not well prepared, it can go wrong for the people that are left behind. That's all I'm saying. So if you go down that path, and if you're offered an earnout, the first thing I would say is the most important thing you're about to sign is your employment agreement. You have not been an employee for however many years you've run your business. You may be a W-2 in your business, but you're the boss, right? Suddenly you're going to report to someone. So I would want to know exactly what's in that employment agreement. What are my expectations? What are the things I have to meet to get my earnout? And do I think they're realistic or not, right? That's, you know your business better than the private equity group. And if they put something that's completely unrealistic to you and you sign it and say, sure, and then you fail, you're not going to get your earnout, right?
Mhm.
So make sure their expectations are real, they're clear, you're understood. So as an example, let's say you own a business in Ohio, and yet you've got a winter home in Florida, right? And you live, because you've done a good job in your business, you live in Florida from December to April to get out of the Ohio cold crap weather, right? And you get your employment agreement, and they expect you to be in the business every day in Ohio for the next 2 years. How's that going to go? Right?
Yeah.
Right? You need to negotiate that stuff up front. And so whatever, I guess the simple way to say it is, and I actually heard this analogy from a real estate agent, and I think it makes sense in the business world as well. I was asked one time, when do you make money on your house? And I said, when I sell it. He goes, you're wrong. It's when you buy it, because that's when you can negotiate everything. When you sell it, you're kind of at the cost of the buyer to negotiate, right? You can always walk away from buying a house if the seller's not willing to meet your agreements. It's the same thing when you're selling your business. So before you sign those papers, you need to make sure that you understand what you're signing up for. And that's the big deal. I think that's the biggest thing I would look at.
Excellent. Well, Todd, this has been great. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that I didn't ask you about or didn't come up?
Yeah, tell us more about you. No, I'm kidding, Greg. I think I know enough about you, but yeah.
I get to talk every single month. They're going to hear more than enough about me.
Yeah, no, it was great being here. Thanks for having me, Greg. I really appreciate it.
Cool. And so you gave a lot of great insights. I'm sure a lot of people are going to see this and say, well, I probably need someone like Todd to help me prepare for my sale or for my transition or deal with my dysfunctional partnership so we can actually make this thing worth something. How do they get a hold of you? How would someone get a hold of you?
All right, let me give you my phone number. It's 513-543-7271. And my email address. It's my first initial T and my last name Eppert. If you're wondering how to spell that, it's at the bottom of the Zoom call you're watching right now, or the podcast you're watching right now, but TEPPERT at focalpointcoaching.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being a guest. You gave us a lot of great insight, and I'm sure I'll be hearing from some of our listeners. Hopefully, you'll hear from some of our listeners, and they could do a lot worse than to work with Todd. So thanks for being a guest, and I appreciate you coming on, and this will be coming out soon. Thanks, Todd.
Thanks, Greg. See ya.